Okay, David Heinemeier Hansen. So, right now we're recording a video podcast and you are on Linux. This is something the
That's
internet would have you believe is not necessarily possible.
it almost wasn't possible. That's the funny thing, right? We just tried to get it going with Riverside, and there was definitely some snafu. But then we jumped into Squadcast, and your earpods doesn't work.
Yeah,
Computers,
so
man.
nothing works. I don't know.
Or everything works. Everything is just an interesting mystery you got to find out.
Yeah,
And I think that's certainly an attitude you should adopt if you're going on a Linux adventure. I think you should have that attitude for any kind of computer because they all break it sometimes. But it is probably fair to say that Linux has more of those adventures, at least in the startup phase, than you're probably used to if you have something that's been vetted by a QA department of 1,500 people who bang on everything. It's a lot more community focused when you do it with Linux, just as it is with all kinds of other open source. But I think what's funny about Linux is a lot of folks have some apprehension about that, while at the same time entrusting their entire business, their net worth, their access to the internet on Linux, 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 on open source, open source, open source, right? Because what, 95% of all servers in the world run Linux. Virtually every system is built with open source software, same kind of model. It is interesting that the last frontier seems to be the desktop, that's where people go like, ooh, that's too scary to try something else than what I've been running for the last 20 years.
I feel like historically, for me at least, I mean, there is that element of like terror of not feeling like you know how to make everything work. And I think we can get into it with Arch Linux, especially. That sounds especially terrifying. But I think historically, a lot of it has just come down to like, oh, the tools that I need to use, like equivalents don't necessarily exist on Linux, you know? And I don't really feel that's as true today. And personally, I kind of feel that's especially because of like the increasing capabilities of the web. You know, like you can use Figma in Linux, whereas prior to that, there was not probably not any great professional UI design tool you could use on Linux, you know?
It's completely changed the game. And I'd say that change of the game is a huge part of why I'm so fascinated and interested and enthusiastic about Linux. Because if you roll the clock back 20 years, like the list of little Mac apps I used to use, like I was, I don't know, very long. The list of native Mac apps I used just before switching to Linux was yay big. And
Mm-hmm.
all of those had great alternatives on Linux. So, except one, Adobe Lightroom. I still really like for my photography. And I thought like, oh, I need a Mac to run that. Well, it turns out Adobe runs great on Windows, and you can dual boot Windows on any on any PC. So that's just what I'm doing.
It
I need
probably honestly
Lightroom about
runs better on Windows. I wouldn't be
it.
surprised.
It probably kind of does.
Yeah.
I think Adobe and Apple not always the
There's a
best of
lot of
friends.
like Windows first software that I found like definitely works better on Windows. Like if you use like real Excel on Mac OS, it really sucks and feels sluggish
Yes.
compared to running it on Windows.
It totally does. So I think if you're going to have like a backup OS for that 1.2 app that you positively need and you can't get anywhere else, it takes about 30 seconds to reboot into Windows if you have two NVMe drives in your machine. So that's a hassle. I wouldn't want to do it for an app I needed 5 times a day, but for something you need it once in a blue moon, like I do with Lightroom, it really isn't a big deal. But I think the larger story, as you say, it is the web. I mean, Figma is a great example. Our designers at 37 Signals, they mostly develop straight in HTML, straight in
Mm-hmm.
CSS. They don't use a lot of pre-production tools, but occasionally they do. And if they're working on graphical design, if they're working
Yeah.
on logo stuff, it's all Figma. And Figma is just a web app. I mean, isn't that kind of incredible that that's how far we've gotten? And not only is Figma a web app, but like Teams, Microsoft Teams, I don't know a lot of people in the US who use Teams, but in Europe, it's absolutely dominant. And it just works as a web app. So does Google
Yeah.
Meet, so does Zoom. Zoom also has a native app, but virtually everything today is on the web, which I, of course, find fantastic because the web is what I love. That to me
Yeah.
is the greatest application platform. I don't actually want a ton of native stuff on my desktop. I want just a handful of tools. I want a great terminal. I want some keyboard interaction with how I set up my machine and all that stuff. But other than that, I kind of want a lot of web apps. So Omachi, for me, the aesthetic that really hit where I went like, I actually can't use Ubuntu anymore, was that a tiling window manager allows you to reduce any window to like one. I think we run a double border highlight around something, and then you just see the web surface. There is zero Chrome. Haha. There's zero browser navigation. There's zero any of that. The dash app equals URL that Chrome and Brave and the other Chromium-based browsers have is amazing in its aesthetic purity when you pair it with a tiling window manager like Hyprland. And then you get something where Linux, I think for a long time, kind of, at least my perception of Linux for a long time, I'd look at someone running Ubuntu or KDE and I'd always go like, it's not quite right. Like the proportions aren't quite right. The font rendering always looked a little off. The different GTK toolkit stuff looked a little off. And I just went, I don't love that. And you look at what's possible with the modern setups, with stuff like Hyprland, with stuff like running Chromium with dash app and all this other stuff. And you just go like, hey, this doesn't look just on par to my aesthetics, to my eyes. It looked way better, way better. And suddenly I have a computer that is just not only different, which I actually think is a property that's valuable in and of itself. I've been running the Mac for 20 years. Do you know what? I'm a little fucking tired of the Jonathan Ive aesthetic. I mean, it's a great aesthetic. It's a wonderful aesthetic, but it's like you're wearing that same plaid shirt for like 20 years. You're like, maybe you should try to mix it up. Wear something else just for a little bit. The novelty of it, it's funny because in technology, not without reason, novelty is often poo-pooed upon. Like, well, if it's just different, it's not better. You're doing it wrong. Jonathan Ive has a great quote in that, right? Like, we're not just trying to be different, we're trying to be better. But I also think there is some value in different. There's some value in the excitement. Remember when, was it iOS 7 came out? When Jonathan Ive just redesigned everything, we were done with skeuomorphic design. And first everyone was like, oh my God, this is crazy. But also, this is kind of cool. This is new. And then they tried just recently to do it again with the glass thing, and it didn't quite have the same impact. Let's just put it like that. It wasn't a sort of a novelty in its sense of something I think a lot of people got excited about. A lot of people got unexcited about it. But let's not even talk about Mac and Apple and whatever. What's exciting to me is that Linux has just surprised me to no end with where it's come. Because I've been watching Linux for 30 years. I knew people running, what was it, Slackware back in the 90s. And I always thought, wow, that's a different kind of nerd. Like, I don't mind being a nerd, but that's a different kind of nerd. Someone who cares about different nerdy topics than me. And it really wasn't until just less than 2 years ago where I went, okay, I'm going to give it a real go. And I'm going to try first Ubuntu, and then I'm going to try to make that really something I dig. And then this summer, finding Arch and Hyprland and just going like, oh my God, this feels like a Ruby moment. So here's something to fit my brain.
Help me sort of understand like the timeline here. Like, I know you switched to Ubuntu sort of as an exploration of what it would look like to sort of decouple yourself from the Apple ecosystem and be a little less dependent on it. You used that for a while. I think you said like a year or something like that. So I'm wondering, like, what did you not like about it enough that you were looking for other things? And then what did you see and where did you see it that made you want to try like Arch? Like, how did you even discover Hyprland, for example?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting story because it's relatively brief. My Linux adventures started with annoyance, started with rebellion, started with Apple just one time too many, just pissing me off. And the specific thing was they were going to yank support for PWAs in Europe because they were pissed about something the European Union had done. And we had just built was it Campfire? Yeah, I think it was Campfire. And we'd gone like, hey, we're going to go in on this PWA thing. Web push is really nice. In fact, I'd give major kudos to the Safari team at Apple for getting web push competitive, such that web applications can have push notifications that are very similar to native push notifications. And we thought, this is wonderful. Let's bet on this. And then we just done that. And once more, Apple just yanks the rug. And I just like, do you know what? This is, I don't know what time this is, but we'd gone through the whole thing with Hey, where Apple threatened to destroy our whole business if we didn't pay the ransom and all that bullshit. And you know what's funny is you'd think that it was the Hey thing that would do it. But when you've been in an ecosystem for 20 years, I think you get bored. You get some Stockholm syndrome here. Like, well, I can't run anything else. There is only Apple. Right? So it took a while for that to kind of wear off. And then the final straw dropped with this PWA stuff. And I just went like, do you know what? I'm going to try something else. And first I actually tried Windows. I tried Windows for about 3 weeks. And I learned a couple things that were really valuable. First, more than half of our customers for Basecamp use Windows. And there were just like a handful of obvious things when I saw how Basecamp looked in Windows where I went like, do you know what? We can do a little better here. There were some scroll bars that needed some special styling. It's always the scroll bars. And no one at 37 Signals had looked at those scroll bars in a fair while. And here I am using Windows. I look at the scroll bars and I'm like, yeah. So we fixed that. And they're like, great. Then I used WSL for a while. That's the kind of Linux subsystem where you can run real Linux stuff on Windows, which is the only way it made sense for me to even consider Windows was, can I run my Ruby stuff? Can I run my open source tool chaining? Can I do all that? And then I tried VS Code. And do you know what? I had one of those experiences where like, this is fine-ish. Like, I could sort of do this. I could see why VS Code is really popular with a lot of people. It's got a huge plugin system. It can do a lot of things. But do you know what? Eventually, I just realized I could do it, but I would have to do it out of spite. Sure. I'd have to power the Windows thing a fair bit by like, I'm doing this because I don't want something else. And I thought, this isn't a long-term viable place for me to be in computing. I like computers too much for it to be kind of an anti thing. I want to be a pro thing. I want to be for something, not just against something. And that led me to trying Ubuntu. And the reason I picked Ubuntu was, I think, the same reason everyone else picks Ubuntu. If you really don't know a lot about Linux, that's just what you've heard. Isn't that the thing everyone runs?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's still the most popular desktop one. So I gave that a shot, and I booted up, and they're like, I don't love this, but let's see how far I can get in 2 weeks. Like really turning it into my own thing. And I got quite far in those 2 weeks. I mean, you can actually do a fair bit on Ubuntu to tailor it and make it better and do sort of window layouting and all that stuff. And I ended up with something I was really happy with. And for about a year, I ran that Omachi, that kind of remix of Ubuntu with all my stuff on it. And we're like, you know, this is pretty good. I am now for something. I'm for the Linux experience. I'm amazed that I haven't wanted to pull out the Mac. Like when I switched off the Mac, it wasn't like I just made a bonfire in my backyard and just set fire to all of it, right? Like the computers were still there. At any time, I could pull out a Mac and do something if I needed to. I just ended up not. But then this was sort of like, hey, this is good. I like it. I like Omachi. I like Ubuntu. This is good. But YouTube, man, YouTube is the most amazing mimetic machine. I think the first time I really got a whiff of, do you know what, this could be different, was probably some of the Primogen stuff, how he was running Linux, how he was running things with workspaces. Then I started falling into a rabbit hole with Trycraft Dev and a bunch of other, what is it, Bread on Penguins is their name, I think. A bunch of other Linux YouTubers who were just showing me different things that didn't look like Ubuntu.
Okay.
And it did not take long until I found videos about Hyprland. And suddenly two worlds kind of connected, because when I started with the Omachi thing, I also started following or looking on the Reddit, the subreddit Unix porn. I don't know if you've seen that.
I saw it because
/r
you linked to it
/Unix
once.
born.
Yeah.
And it's a showcase of how people rice, which is the sort of aesthetic personalization of Linux. And there's some really novel stuff there. But I always thought, again, I had the same reaction I had to Linux itself. Do you know what? That's a different kind of nerd. Like Hyprland, setting things up from scratch, Arch. Like I had seen some installed videos about Arch, and I went like, again, is Ubuntu not fine? Isn't it fine? And I think it was probably Typecraft who had some video on setting up his own Hyprland thing, and he had set it up in a really nice way. And I went like, oh man, this looks really actually interesting. Do you know what? I should just try it. Maybe I don't want to run it. Maybe it's too much. Maybe it takes too long. But let me just try it. It's Linux. It's free. The worst thing that can happen is I spend an afternoon learning stuff. I think that's, by the way, is a good moniker for Linux in general. So I did that. I installed Hyprland, and it was very basic, and I kind of struggled a little bit. But as soon as I got this sort of the feel in my fingers of the ergonomics of a tiling window manager, I went like, what took me so long? I'd seen people run i3 and DWM like over a decade ago, and thinking, again, I'm not that kind of nerd. There's a theme here, right? There's a theme of where I had boxed myself in thinking, I'm a certain kind of nerd. Like I like programming languages. I really like Ruby. I like the web, but here are all these other different areas of nerdhood that's not for me. And I've really humbled myself in that regard by realizing, you know what? That's just bullshit. There is no domain of nerddom, no domain of Linux-ness that I can't sit down and figure out if I put my mind to it. So I did. And then things went crazy.
Okay, so for anyone who doesn't know what all these things are, and I am pretty uninformed on a lot of this stuff, like when I've installed Omarchy on its own, so I do not know what anything looks like before the whole thing is installed. So I don't know like where Arch stops and where Hyprland starts and where Hyprland starts and where Omarchy starts. So when you install Arch on its own, I'm pretty sure I saw you say like you just get a terminal. That's it. Can you even open like Chrome or something?
No. You get nothing. It does not even have a window managing system. When you install Arch in its sort of basic form, it is just the thinnest layer on top of the Linux kernel. Like you're still in the 16 color TDY. You don't have, there's nothing. There is nothing. You have to literally install everything.
Is Hyprland then built on top of like other big open source tools, or did they literally implement all of the graphical user interface layer?
Yeah. So the way it works is the base layer, the operating system, the things that gives you access to files and network and whatever, that's Arch. Or I mean, it's the Linux kernel, and then Arch distributes that Linux kernel along with access to a lot of other packages, but not packages sort of in the box. There's no curl. There's no vget. There's definitely no Chrome. There's nothing. It's just a complete blank slate. And then on top of that, you install Hyprland. And Hyprland uses Wayland, which is the way it kind of paints on the screen. And Wayland has a lot of protocols that make other things sort of nice and easy to happen. But Wayland itself is indeed just a set of protocols. Before Wayland, there was something called X11. There still is something called X11. That's kind of what these window manager and desktop environments build on top of, right?
Yeah, gotcha. So like the reason you have a wallpaper is because of Hyprland, not because of...
Do you know what's funny? Not even that. Hyprland by itself does not even have wallpapers. That's what's so hilarious about it. It's a freaking layer cake, right? You start with Arch, then you got some Wayland protocols on top, then you put your Hyprland on top. That'll give you just a drawing of the windows and the rotation of how they move around and configuration files to setting up a monitor and bindings. But it does not even have background images.
But at that point, you can open like... You can open graphical user interface applications at this point.
Yes.
Like once Hyprland is set up, now you can run Chrome, now you can run VS Code, like whatever.
And also, I misspoke here. It actually does have backgrounds. You just can't change them. Or I think if you're changing, there's some arcane way of changing it in a config. Like they're built in. If you want backgrounds as we know them, like you set your own and you rotate them, that's another program. That's another program. We use in Omachi, we use something called SwayPG. There's bunch of others that can do it. Some of them have animations when you switch back and forth between the backgrounds. But it's fun. So Hyprland, it gives you something where windows can start up button. The windows can get tiled. That's that magic sensation you've seen. There's a full screen window. You run a hotkey, and then bam, it cuts the screen in half, and now you have a window next to it. You start another one, bam, it cuts that side of it in half and puts the window down there. That's the tiling window manager feel. But like the top bar, for example, that has the clock and which work the space you're on, that's not in the box either.
Yeah,
that's another thing called if you want
another question
to lock, that's Hyprlock. If you want things to sort of be, it's just there's a lot of rabbits here.
So if you install something like Chrome, which you install from whatever, like there's some sort of like package place
repository, yes,
right,
yes,
and you don't have Hyprland installed, you do that before installing Hyprland, and then you type Chrome on the command line. Like, what actually happens?
I think it'll blow up because it doesn't have the graphical environment to operate in. It'll just air out. But I'm the TTY. You can run normal
like some sort of defaulty sort of things to be wired
it
up,
expects
and Hyprland
an environment
is the thing that sort of fills that hole, such that when those apps try to use those things, they now exist and whatever.
Yes, they need an X11. They need a Wayland protocol to work within, and then they need a graphical environment that kind of coordinates all that. And then you have the two big ones on Linux are KDE and GNOME. Ubuntu uses GNOME, and I think it's Fedora uses KDE, and there's a bunch of different mixes, and there are a ton of different distributions, and they all kind of use them a different way. That's like one category. Those kinds of graphical environments are very similar to a Windows or to macOS. And then you have the other category of tiling window managers that are very different. That's a Linux-only thing. There's been attempts to recreate it on Mac and Windows, but it's always some hacky bullshit where you can see like, it wasn't really built for that. And Hyprland is just one of the newest one. As I mentioned, there's a handful of others, i3, DWM, that existed for a long time. This has been a Linux specialty for quite a long time to have these tiling window managers. And it's really unique. But the one I got attracted to was Hyprland. And part of it is its aesthetics. Like, it's got incredible animations out of the box, even though I don't actually even like animations for a lot of things. I turn a lot of animations off. For example, I'm completely allergic to animations jumping between workspaces. This is one of the things I always hated on the Mac. There's a 500 millisecond animation switching between workspaces on the Mac, which just for me is so much friction that I don't want to do it.
Makes everything feel slow.
It does, which is funny because like Macs are super fast, right? Like Apple has great chips. It's not a CPU performance thing. It's a choice. It's a conscious choice to.
It's just a perception thing, right? Like a.
Yes. But that perception is very much reality, and you end up using your computer in a different way. This was one of the things that the Primogen's showing me how he uses his workspace setup really resonated with me, because I saw him jump back and forth between I'm on my editor, I'm in my browser, I'm on my chat channel, crazy fast. And I was like, I can't do that on the Mac. That's not how the Mac works. There's a way to hack things and approximate, but it's never quite right. And Hyprland just gets this stuff right, and it builds in a aesthetic sensibility that I don't think I offend any long-term users of Linux by saying, perhaps wasn't so widely distributed in Linux in years past, right? There was a lot of things where this was a system built by programmers for programmers. And you know what? If the fonts look a little funky, if the spacing is a little off, if the toolkits don't have a cohesive design aesthetic, who cares? I don't even look at that stuff. I just get to it, right? That's not me. I care about the aesthetics very, very much. This is one of the main reasons I used Ruby. Ruby has the best programming aesthetics that I've been able to find anywhere. And this is one of the reasons, for example, I hate TypeScript, because TypeScript takes something that has pretty good aesthetics, JavaScript, and turns it into something that has horrible aesthetics, right? And there's also the reason, by the way, not that I have the proclivity for it, but I look at one piece of Rust code and I just like my eyes just start bleeding. I'm like, I'm amazed that there are people who can work like that. And that's what's wonderful about programmers. They come in all different shapes and sizes. I come in the shape that is, I need things to look good because otherwise I don't feel good. And if I don't feel good, I'm not going to be motivated. If I'm not going to be motivated, I'm not going to be productive. So this is how I start rationalizing spending umpteen hours writing
Yeah.
Linux, is that like, oh, it's actually about productivity.
Okay, so I kind of want to talk more about like all the things that you had to piece together to make this work. Like we got a little taste of it when you were just talking about, okay, there's one app for the wallpaper, one app for the window management, one app for locking the computer. So like, where does even does Hyperlink give you a mouse cursor, or is that a separate thing?
It does give you a mouse cursor, but it just gives you one. If you want to style it, there's different ways of doing that with themes. But it does actually have a fair amount of things built in. Sometimes I'm
Okay.
surprised by the amount of things that it has built in, especially things like bindings. So key bindings and the way you set them up, super nice. The way you lay out your workspaces, super nice. Like it's got a bunch of things where you go like, wow, that's really advanced, but yet it doesn't have a menu bar. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have a tool to change background images. It doesn't have a way to lock the system, like these individual pieces. And I think I'm very much a convention over configuration person, right? And this is the ultimate of configuration. Literally
Yeah.
every tiny Lego block is just splattered all over the floor. And now you got to put it together. And I understand why that was niche, or is niche still. There's just not that many people who want to spend 50 hours setting up
Yeah.
their programming environment. And there are certainly, you can spend a lot more than that. Ask me how I know. But
Yeah.
you can also realize that, you know what, that's a temporary project. That's
Yeah.
what I realized with Ruby. When I came to Ruby, there was nothing. Like Ruby didn't do ORMs. It didn't have HTML templating languages that were, to my aesthetics at least, pleasant to use. And none of it was integrated. All of it
Mhm.
was just separated Lego bricks all over the floor. I had to put it all together. But you know what? By the time I was done putting it together, damn it, that was a nice piece of Lego.
Yeah.
And that's what attracted me to this whole adventure, was not that I want to spend my days ricing. But you know what? I could put, I'm just going to throw out a random number. I could put 1,000 hours into this, maybe. Maybe it's only 500. Maybe it's 300. I don't know. But I can put a lot of time into this. And then I can have not a nice development environment, not a great development environment, but like literally almost the perfect development environment. And much the same as I've done it with Rails. That seems like a worthwhile investment if I'm still going to continue using computers for another decade. What the hell is 1,000 hours spent this year on Rising Linux if I'm going to be able to use that and amortize it over the next decade or two? This is, again, the Rails story. I've amortized all the time I put into Rails over
Yeah.
25 years.
I
And
hear
I
you
thought, like,
saying
great
this,
investment.
but I, from the outside, it appears that you enjoy this way too much for the sake of it on its own.
I also do.
Ignoring the mean, the what you're gonna ever do with it. And I think that's awesome. Honestly, that's something that I've been like watching from afar. And this is like a total meta conversation, but it's been quite inspiring to me to see someone like you who's already like sort of done so much and achieved so much still find something to be this excited about that you can just like can't wait to wake up and get your computer in the morning to start doing something on. Because I feel like I haven't had something I've been that excited about in a long time, and I've worried that I'm not going to find it again. So it's awesome to see that you can still get that just like giddy about a project like this.
That's proportionate to the revelation to me. Like, what's been so shocking to me about this Linux journey was, do you know what? I discovered all of this 18 months ago. Like, it didn't just appear 18 months ago, right? Like, it's already been there. Hyperland had already been around. There was all these subcultures already doing a lot of really interesting things. And my excitement was to realize this is exactly what I didn't even know I was looking for, right? Like, there's just this novelty of it. Again, I keep drawing on Ruby because there's so many parallels to that excitement you're speaking about, the getting out of bed excitement, because that's what I had when I discovered Ruby. I'd been doing programming for quite a long time. I've been doing a bunch of PHP. I thought PHP was fine. I thought PHP allowed me to build the web apps I wanted to build. But then I found Ruby and I just went, pooh, what the what? And I really do like these kind of quests. Like, I've had mini versions of them over the year. Obviously, Ruby has been the biggest one by far. Even this Omachi stuff isn't close to that. I mean, I've been playing with that for 3 months. I've been playing with, working on Rails for 25 years. So there's a
Yeah.
different scale there. But I've also had a small adventure. Kamal, for example, when we moved out of the cloud with 37 Signals, got rid of AWS and pulled onto our own stuff, I had to build something for us to do the deployment in the way I wanted it to happen. And it felt like it had a little bit of that. But that was sort of a 2-month hunt, right? Like then it was done. Kamal is now awesome. It does almost everything we needed to do. I have great colleagues at 37 Signals who continue working on it. Omachi's not in that space yet. It's still very much like in the initial pioneer work environment. And that's just the best part of the greenfield stuff, where you feel like you're in a new system. You have a lot of the terrain kind of fuzzily mapped out, but now you got to pencil it all in. And when I find something like that, and I go like, here's an unexplored territory, here's an unexplored territory, I just rush. Like I run as fast as I can through that territory because it is so invigorating to cover that terrain as quickly as I humanly can. And the rush is unbelievable. This already, just 2 months into it, ranks on top 5, at least, maybe top 3 all-time technology rushes that I've had in all the time I've used computers. And that's saying something. I mean, that's why I'm so obsessed, I think is a fair word to use at this point, right? Like I literally basically can't think or talk about anything else in a work context. And which is a little bit, I mean, at some point that's going to have to fade, right? Like I can't just do this until end of days. We also have other obligations and responsibilities, and I'm involved with a lot of other projects, and they also eventually going to need some love. But I have also found that when that inspiration shows up and it is as bright as this one is, you are a damn fool if you ignore it or put it back on the shelf, because it will spoil. That's the last chapter of rework, by the way.
Yeah.
Inspiration is perishable. And I have internalized that really deeply. And part of it is I have a freedom now that I was going to say, I don't know why I say that. I say that in a reaction because I think that's what people want to hear. Because I've always had that freedom. That was the freedom I built Rails with when we didn't have customers, when we didn't have a bunch of employees, when we didn't have a bunch of other things. And I just went like, you know what? This is what I want to do. I want to build this thing. I want to build Rails, even though we're barely off the ground with Basecamp. I'm just going to do it. And that's the same thing here. But is it nice also that we have a business that has a bunch of employees at this point and can move other balls forward while I go 400 miles an hour deep on Linux? Yes, that's very nice. But yeah.
So how much stuff would you say has just been like curating your favorite pieces of like the Arch ecosystem and putting it into this package? And how much have you like actually had to just like do from scratch? Like, is there any, and even from scratch might just mean like still a level of abstraction higher than the things that you're pulling together, but like what stands out in your mind as like, this is the things that are truly like unique to what we've put together here that you just wouldn't have if you weren't using Omarchy?
A lot of it is curation. A lot of it is a curation of ideas, integrating things, picking out the best parts of it, the best patterns, ideas, making it cohesive. I think some of the novelties, perhaps, if you will, that we brought to the game is 2 things I'd call out. One is Rising, as you will find it on our Unix porn, is based on a set of dots. So people put up these configuration files and then they kind of trade them. It's a fairly cumbersome process actually to get those onto your machine and run your setup that way. Omachi ships with, I think at this point, 11 default themes, and I think there's 30 or 40 extra themes that people made, because we've come up with essentially a packaging format where you can theme the entire system in a consistent way, because there's a convention that says we use Waybar, we use Hyperidle, we use Hyperlock, we use Walker. We've made a bunch of choices about the individual pieces that are in the system, and once those pieces have been locked in, we can now allow everyone to depend on them being there. That's convention over configuration 101. When you establish that broad baseline, people can write towards it. It almost becomes like an API for theming an entire system without having to do too much discovery without the user having to do any intervention. This is why in Omachi you can switch back and forth the themes without having to do anything. Others can make their own themes. So I think that's really nice. Another thing related here is I brought over the idea of Rails database migrations to Omachi, which allows us to rapidly migrate the system, which packages are installed, how the configuration files are set up in a predictable way that's almost entirely invisible to the user. This is, again, one of those things in the Rising community as it is today. If someone gives you their dots and you then start specializing them and they do some major update, that's not easy to reincorporate. I mean, a lot of people think, oh, well, I got to reinstall my system or I got to set up everything. And I was like, you know what? That doesn't even just work for me personally. I have way too many computers to think about reinstalling all the time. If I'm changing something about how Omachi works, I want that on all my computers right away, no effort. So we got that migration system, which is really very simple. I mean, it's a way of keeping track of which migrations have run, have a little bit of like commit theory. If the migration fails, it won't record that it's run. It can be rerun, and then do all that work and be able to take an early Omachi system that hasn't been updated for a while and bring it all the way up to the latest. And now you have everything that someone would have installed a fresh Omachi system on your system. I think that's really key to bringing people along.
Yeah. And what's the process for that, by the way? Is that like the same sort of process as installing it in the first place? Like you pull down that script?
We built it in. There's an underlying script called Omachi-update that will pull down the latest Git repository. That's how Omachi is actually distributed. It's distributed as a Git repository. It'll pull it down. It'll check if there's any of these new migrations. It'll run another script, Omachi-migrate, to actually run the individual migrations, and then it'll update the system packages when the whole thing is done. But now we actually have a new Omachi menu system, so you don't even have to go into a terminal and write Omachi-update. You go into your Omachi menu system, you do that on super alt space, you go down to update, you pick Omachi, you got everything.
Cool. So at what point when you were trying to get all this stuff working, did you realize, fuck, I better make these steps reproducible and somehow turn this into like a provisioning system because this was a lot of fucking work?
I knew that from the get-go. And the reason I knew that is, as I said, I have multiple computers. This is one of the reasons I've adopted a philosophy of disposable devices. I don't have anything on an individual computer that I care about. Like that computer will at most have a minute or two of local state that's not disposable. And that's just until I hit git commit.
Git push or whatever, yeah.
Exactly. That I commit something in there. And then the second I've done that, I could take that box and I could chuck it out the window. It can get stolen. It can get lost. It can burn down. And none of my data is gone. None of my configurations are gone. I have everything reproducible. So I knew the second I started on Omachi that I wanted that again. And partly because I'd already done a similar system with Omachi in a prototype form. So I knew what I wanted to keep and what I wanted to change. And I also knew that this was going to be pivotal if I wanted other people to use it for me. And I had already an idea in my head that our commitment to Linux at 37 Signals required this, that I'm not going to have someone new start at 37 Signals. And then the first thing they do for the first 2 weeks is rice out and set up their Linux system. That seems like bad economics to me, right? Like just as an employer.
Sure.
So I wanted something where they could not just get up and running as quickly as they could on the Mac, but way quicker. I've set the goal that 15 minutes, that's the deadline. You unwrap your new framework, okay, you spend a little time maybe putting it together because that's a bit of a IKEA fun and you get to have that. So you spend 5-10 minutes maybe putting it together. But by the time you turn it on for the first time and you have your little Omachi USB key that you can plug in, 15 minutes to install the whole system, pull down all the 37 Signals app, get set up on our Tailscale Mesh VPN, make a change, deploy to production. That's what I want. I want 15 minutes from new box to your cooking.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what it is on the Mac right now for almost anyone. I I set up a lot of Macs because when I was on the Mac, I also had a lot of computers. And whenever there was a new one coming out, I'd get that and I'd set it up. And I really got it down. And I would spend a couple of hours just
Yeah.
everything just right? A couple of hours. And first of all, as kind of a hassle, I want it all automated. I want it to be a provisioning system. I want it to be like my deploys. We've stopped sort of lovingly curating new boxes and giving them names like mountains or cows, right? Like this is just like a box. I want to be able to deploy on it as soon as that IP comes online. That's what Kamal was all about. And now let's apply that same thinking to developer desktops, to my own desktops. New computer, 15 minutes later, boom, I'm running.
That's awesome. I installed it, played with it so far, and have found it way more fun than I expected to be totally honest with you. Like it feels very nice. Like it's very fast. There's little things about like how you use it that it's almost like hard for it to come across. I feel like in the demos and stuff that you've shared, like even just like focusing windows, like
Yes.
super left, right, up and down to sort of like jump to the exact window that you want.
Yes.
It feels cool. I have been very much enjoying it, but I still live in this sort of terror of like, I do not know what I might break and I do not know how I will fix it if it breaks. How rational do you think that is, first of all? And I guess like how much do you think someone should know about managing a Linux system to try using this thing as their sort of full-time platform?
First of all, I think it is real. I think Linux does break more often than, say, the Mac does, partly because it moves faster and updates are being pushed out all the time, partly because Arch in particular is what's called a rolling distribution. So you always have the latest of everything, which as a developer, I find amazing. I want the latest of everything, but there is some risk there. We're mitigating it in a bunch of different ways. I think, first of all, the Linux lore that you have to know if you hit an error message and what to do about it has gotten so much easier to approach because of AI. You can almost take any error message that you face. Sometimes, let's say you royally screw something up. You can't even boot the system. I've done that. I mean, obviously, I've been setting up all these systems, so sometimes I have screwed things up. I take a picture with my goddamn phone, feed it into ChatGPT. It'll read what's on the screen grab from my phone and say like, "Oh, it's because you don't have this thing," and like, "Oh, yeah, that was the thing." So I think AI is actually one of the key components to making Linux more approachable to far more people, because it's like having your own personal Linux expert sitting right next to you, and you can just tap it and go like, "Hey, chat, come over here. I got this thing," and like the person just knows. In many cases, not in all cases, AI isn't knowledgeable with everything yet, but so much of sort of the standard stuff that people hit on Linux, taken care of. The other part is,
what's like an example, by the way, of something that actually breaks,
So we had an example, when was that? 2 weeks ago. There was an update pushed out to a critical component of the boot system called UWSM that broke.
Okay.
And it was really not a great package to break, because it broke like right in the boot sequence and essentially bricked the machine. And you had to do this manual intervention that by the time you knew the manual intervention, it was like a couple of minutes, you were back in business. But you look at your machine and it's not booting. So a bunch of people found it on their own with AI. I don't know if the person who wrote it up for the Omachi community also used AI to find it, but that was an example of sort of the worst case scenario. And I thought it was a good example too, because here's the absolute worst thing that can happen. A package goes out, it breaks a bunch of systems, then what? First, the person who pushed out the package fixed it in like 7 hours. 7 hours from here's a problem to it's now resolved in the latest version. Then it took longer for the package to get widely distributed, but in Omachi, we were able to just say like, okay, we're not going to upgrade this here. Then the rest of the Omachi community, in I think maybe an hour, 2 hours, there was like, okay, here's how to fix it. So,
and does everyone's system, like, did people have to manually trigger an update to pull in like
they did?
This?
Yeah.
Okay. So
if you had to either manually have triggered an update, or you have had to install Omachi from scratch in, I think it
in
was
that
a 3 or
window.
4 hour window or something like
Okay.
that where we did not have the patch in the system for it. So it was real. I mean, there was definitely a number of folks who got stuck in that loop and then had to find the solution and then applied a couple of minutes of a fix to it. But you look at all those components and you go like, okay, that was the worst case. Like the most critical component in the boot setup, pushed out wide distribution, and everyone got back up and running in no time at all. I mean, I gotta love open source when it works like that because you know what? That's also how the rest of everything works. We
Mhm.
push out a new version of Rails, for example. Bunch of people upgrade. They find something critical.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to fix it in no time at all. They're going to push out a fix and you're going to apply that fix.
Yeah.
Every piece of software breaks. If you want total security in the sense that nothing you run has a potential breaking, you're going to run old stuff or you're going to run commercial stuff. Those are the two options. Old stuff is a fair strategy. That's what Ubuntu and others use, where they just go like, hey, we're just going to use some packages. We've all tested the integration of them. They may be a couple of years old. So maybe you don't get the latest version of something. But in many cases, it doesn't matter. For many users, it doesn't matter. I think developers are a little special. They don't want to use a package from 2 years ago if that's something they really need. Or you have the commercial systems, Windows and Mac, where they have like these just massive QA teams, but that also has really long release cycles. Like the Mac only releases a major upgrade to their operating system once a year, right? So if you want the pace and the thrill, the excitement that we've been having in the Omachi community, where I pushed out like 20 upgrades in 7 weeks, and like there were major things that were adding new capabilities to the system, partly because the system didn't do so much when it started. But you know what? That's really fun to be part of.
Yeah.
It's really fun to feel like the system you're using is alive and you actually have an influence on it. Not only can you influence the main distribution, how it works by submitting PRs and opening issues, you can also just change your own damn system because all of it is open source. So
Yeah.
there's something you don't like about how I set up my system, bam, you just change it in a million ways that would never be possible on the Mac. Like on the Mac, you're not rearranging how the Mac menu bar works or restyling that. That's off limits. That's been locked inside the vault that is the design high ground at Apple. And again, totally fair. I think that's actually good for a lot of users. Developers like us, we like to tinker. We like to be able to take things apart. We like to be able to change them around. We like to make our environments our own. And the ability to do that in Linux land is just orders of magnitude greater than it is with a Mac.
I think the key there is as long as it's reproducible, right? Which is what you've done with this whole thing.
Yes. I do think that's key to it. And I think this is why so many people have jumped on the Omachi train already. And again, we've just been around for 2 months. A bunch of folks are seeing, oh, do you know what? I can adapt some of my personalizations to the system. Maybe I bring a few substitutions, but we're building a whole system together, sharing the same aesthetics, TUIs and having default tooling, everything just set up nicely from the get-go. It's not like, oh, I get a new box, I gotta set all this stuff up by myself. And I think that appeals to a lot of people. Like the super nerds will say, well, we already had that. It's called Nix. And they're right to some definition of right. Like there are other systems that do this in an even more rigorous way. And some of them are very impenetrable. I think I like the Nix setup, but holy shit. If you thought Arch was difficult, just wait until you see a Nix package, the Nix packaging configuration link, which was just this whole old universe that even the people I know who are very enthusiastic about Nix go like, yeah, you probably don't want to run it yourself, which is also great. I do think that we are gentrifying Arch here a fair bit. We are moving in new people into the community who don't necessarily share the same sensibilities as the old guard. Like for the longest time, Arch was renowned for being a Linux distribution that didn't even have an installed script. Like you'd go manually into all the little configuration files. Oh, I want Wi-Fi. Let me set this up by hand first. And it would take a long time to do.
Dude,
and if you didn't know it,
even with Omarchy, there's things that you have to do in the installation process with Linux that still kind of feel like, okay, follow these exact steps and don't think too much about what they mean, and it will make your system work. You know, I know you
That's
guys are doing that, shipping an ISO, right? Is what you're working on
it's
next. So
literally I just got the ISO this morning, booting in its full complete form.
that's awesome.
So this is part of that vintage process. I like there's the early bird badge that people in the Omarchy community who install things by hand will have after this. Like, yeah, I used Omarchy when we still had to run IWCTL to do Wi-Fi on the installer ourselves, right? So they can tell those stories, but we're going to move past that in about 5 seconds. And partly not because I actually think some of it is a little fun. I actually think it's helped Omachi a little bit that you kind of had to follow some things and that it both put some people off, but it maybe was just enough of an adventure that you got a bit of an IKEA effect to it.
It was fun.
Like I'm part of this. I'm setting it up here. I'm doing a little bit of
Yeah.
stuff. But
I'll
we're
say,
gonna have the
ironically,
ISO.
I installed Windows on the same, like Framework sent me one of the desktop machines, and I installed Windows on the same machine on a separate NVMe. It took me like 19 tries to get this whole thing to work, by the way. And there was no way to use like Wi-Fi in Windows without downloading like the framework drivers. But in Linux, I could. Like in Arch, I could use the Wi-Fi out of the box, but in Windows, I couldn't. And it's just kind of
It's
just kind of like a
crazy.
funny.
It's not even just funny, it's a revelation. The number of jokes I've gotten back from people of like, well, running Linux is all about like your Wi-Fi not working and your printer not working. I kid you not. Not only does Linux now, this is, by the way, very unique. So Linux, the reason it's 40 million lines of code, in part, is Linux ships all the drivers for everything inside the box.
I was
Like,
going to
they're
ask about
very
this. Like, what
batteries
hardware
included.
issues have you had or not had? Like, I think a lot of people have this like picture in their head of like, oh, I've got this audio interface, like LOL,
Right.
trying to get that to work on Windows, you know?
Yeah, so right now I'm running off a Camlink 4K using my Sony FX30. Just works. Like no drivers, no nothing to set up. I'm using my Shure MB7 microphone. What else do I got? I got my beloved mechanical keyboards that all use these wonderful 2.4 gigahertz dongles. Everything basically has worked. Now, there's a little bit of an asterisk to that. You got to use the right hardware. That space is now very big. It used to be like this big, right? Like the right hardware meant like 2 computers. Now, Linux has a ton of drivers built into the kernel for tons of hardware, but there still is some stuff like the mini PCs I've been really excited about. Let me see if I can find one of those small ones.
All those B-Link things.
Yes, these the B-Link things.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of people who make these, a bunch of different companies, and there's another one that makes them called Minis Forum. And on some of their models, they actually managed to find a Wi-Fi card that does not work out of the box with Linux. So I just went like, yeah, just don't get that one. Buy one of the ones that have the card that works. That's the rarity, but it is possible. I think on the laptop side, it's more prevalent. There are more things with some models of laptops. Like I think Samsung in particular actually is really bad with this. Like they just no attention paid to anything with Linux. It could be a little funky. But I'd also just say, like, why would you buy that when you could buy a framework, right?
Yeah.
Like when it comes to the laptop space, I just buy from someone who cares about Linux and sets it up because there's amazing choices. I mean, my favorite laptop is a framework. So like that's a fortunate mix here. But there's a bunch of others. I just let me show you another one I just got in here. This Tuxedo Computers laptop that I just got in that's kind of this similar-ish as the framework. I don't like it quite as much but it's another option. There's a bunch of options for this, and I've made my hardware recommendations. They're on the Omachi manual side. It just isn't that big of a deal. I mean, also, let me just mention the printer thing. For the life of me, I could not get my printer to work with a Mac consistently. And like there was something about Brother had like a driver that stopped working like 3 versions ago when they were running on something. I mean, whenever you ask hardware manufacturers, especially printer manufacturers, to write driver software, it's kind of like I don't know if you use any of the Canon software for setting up your Canon camera as a webcam.
Okay.
It's just like the worst software you could possibly imagine. The last people you want writing software that runs on your computer, generally speaking, is hardware makers. So the fact that I could just get the printer, my Brother printer, to work instantly with Linux, I was like, wait, the joke is reversed. It is now harder.
Is that over Wi-Fi or is that with a
over Wi-Fi? Yeah.
It's a miracle. It's truly a
So,
miracle.
right, like that's by the way still an NP hard problem in computer science apparently to get your printer to work. But
My
your
scanner does
example,
not work properly at all. I had to download and pay for this obscure
right?
piece of software that looks like it was meant to run on the operating system 20 years ago called
Yes.
ViewScan that doesn't look like anything else on my
Oh, I
machine.
remember ViewScan. I literally used that
It
20
works
years ago.
brilliantly, but it's the only
Yes.
way for me to scan anything, you know?
That's crazy. So I think what's funny here is that there's some of it that's still true. Not every piece of hardware works out of the box with Linux, but a ton of it does. And also, it's true for every other operating system. The Mac doesn't work with everything. Windows doesn't work with everything. And even if it does work with something, it's often, as you say, a very obscure process to find the drivers to even install it. Like I found this on when I've wanted to reinstall Windows. This whole thing of NVMe drivers for certain drives not being in the Windows box kind of blew my mind. After reinstalling Linux about 400 different times, I'd just totally forgotten that that was a thing. That you'd have to go to a little website and find a little support link and then go to the download section and then find some exe file that you hope kind of would run. And like that's madness, actually. None of that stuff
Okay,
is
dude,
on Linux in that way.
I was trying to install like the Epic Game Launcher on Windows on the framework, and it
Yep.
just wouldn't fucking work. It wouldn't work. The only way to get it to work was I found some Reddit answer that basically had me run the installer from the command line with some flag, and it worked. I didn't even, and
Right.
it was just like it's just like another one of those funny things where it's like, why am I afraid of Linux if like this is what I
Right.
accept with
Yes.
Windows? You know what I
Because
mean?
you're like, it's the devil you know. I had
Yeah.
this with, I was setting up a, what was it, Mac laptop? I was setting both up a Mac laptop, and then I was setting up a new phone for my mom. So I was going through this as like pretty savvy Apple user of 20 some years.
Mhm.
And I kept hitting thing after thing going, there's no way she would have done this on her own. No way she would have figured out like why this had to be retried and so on. And you just realize once you step out of the familiar for a hot second, this is computers. Like a lot of computers, like they have quirks, and Linux, they just have unfamiliar quirks in most
Mhm.
cases to what you're used to. And in many cases, it's actually way nicer. It's way nicer that the kernel just have all the drivers built in. It's way nicer that every piece of software you want, especially on Arch, is installed as a package. Like this idea, when I was setting up I know Homebrew is trying to approximate some of it, and I think that's great. But when I was setting up most of my Macs, like if I wanted Zoom, I'd go to zoom.com. I'd find a little download link. I'd download a thing. I'd get a DMG. I'd open the DMG. Then I'd fucking manually drag that icon from the DMG over to my applications folder. And you're like, I thought, isn't that what everyone does? And then you show up on Linux and you do like Pacman-S Zoom or whatever. And then it's in. You're like, wait, what? Didn't I have to do something? Like, am I not supposed to go to people's websites to get their software? Once you get familiar and used to those things, it really stands out that not all computers work this way.
Yeah, pretty epic. So, okay, I have two quick questions for you. First one, and maybe it's not too quick, but hopefully we can keep it quick. What are some of the tools like software that you're using on Linux to do things that people worry are they're not going to be able to do on Linux? Like I messaged you the other day asking you, what are you using for like editing videos? Because you've been recording these
Yes.
like screencasts and publishing to YouTube.
Right.
That feels like the sort of thing that's like not a Linux task in a lot of people's minds, I think.
Right.
So is there any things that you recommend for doing the sorts of things that people sort of think about as like, well, I'm a creative multimedia person, I need a Mac, you know?
I do think, again, still, I'm focusing Omachi on sort of developer adjacent individuals. Like, there's a bunch of designers I would consider to be developer adjacent individuals. Like, if you just, all you do is do video work all day long, I think a Mac is probably just easier to deal with. Like, if you don't get any benefit out of it being an amazing developer platform and having all your tools and Docker running natively and all these other things, you're not my first port of call here, right? Like I'm focusing this towards developers, but there are a lot of developers who are also creators. I mean, you're a perfect example of this. I do a lot of it too. And for making videos, for example, 4K videos, as I now do, I use two things that are, by the way, installed by default on Omachi. One is Up Studio, which is incredible. Like the best way of recording screencasts that I've found. Like the way you can position your little head while you're typing over in the corner, pull things in. It can do a bunch of things I couldn't make the Mac do, or thought I couldn't make the Mac do when I was using Mac tools for it. Then when I edit those videos that come out, the recordings that come out, I edit them in Kdenlive, which is a timeline-based editor. And I'd say maybe it's lacking a little bit of its aesthetics on the interface, but it's super fast to use. And the way I edit videos is usually I just cut things and then I insert an image if I need to show something else. I'm not doing super
motion
sophisticated
graphics
stuff.
and like
Motion graphics. I don't do that stuff. If you do that stuff though, there's also people running DaVinci. I know it doesn't run as well, but apparently there's production houses using DaVinci with Linux. And you can get DaVinci up and running on Omachi too. So I'd say all that kind of stuff, if you want to be a creator, you're doing developer materials and so on, perfectly, not just usable, but I found a workflow that was better than the one I had on the Mac. So really happy with that. I'd say Lightroom, as I mentioned before, is the one where I haven't fully explored the alternative. There's actually a ton of them. I tweeted out that I was using Lightroom. I got like 4 answers back. There's something called Darktable. There's Super Raw or Raw something. There's a bunch of different ways of doing it, but I just haven't gotten to that one yet. But that's where I also say, if you have an app like that, like I have Lightroom, and you go like, I can't live without it, you should ask yourself, is this an app I need 5 times a day? If so, all right, maybe just stick with what you got. Or have 2 computers. Did you know you're allowed to actually own 2 computers? And on screens that are not the fucking Apple boxes, you can plug 2 of them in at the same time, and it's like 1 click to switch between them because only Apple insists of having a single input. I love Apple screens. Like I'm looking at my beautiful 6K XDR here, but that's kind of annoying. If you have a normal non-Apple monitor, most of them have built-in KVMs, and you can just plug in 2 computers and then boop, boop. You hop back and forth. It's not 30-second reboot. It's
Dude, I wish I could
1
do
second
that with the Pro Display. That would be.
It is actually the reason I'm considering changing my Pro Displays. I like the Pro Display a lot, but there's a bunch of new 6Ks coming out. Asus has one at the Pro Art, which, by the way, is $1,300. Can you even what?
I know.
I paid like $6,000 for my XDR. $6,000. And you're telling me that the Pro Art is going to be $1,300? Now, is it an aluminum blob that you could literally hang on the wall as a sculpture? No, it's not. It has a plastic enclosure. So maybe that's a trade-off. But you know what? I'm willing to trade some aluminum for some KVM one-click action here.
There was that other one that you shared too that looked like basically like trademark infringement level ripoff of the XDR, which I'm a little skeptical of because of how close it looks. But
and someone did a review of that on YouTube. I think that one is $1,800, and they were like, "You got to look next to each other to tell them apart." Like the panel itself, which makes sense. I mean, the XDR panel, what is it, like 5 years old, 6 years old?
I saw something with that display too. That display has like a slightly higher resolution than the Pro Display XDR, like by like a couple dozen pixels. And a pet peeve that I've had lately that like never dawned on me until recently is in Tailwind, like our biggest breakpoint by default is like 1536. And if I do 2 windows next to each other on my Pro Display, it's like just a hair too small.
You're like
jump,
4
to
pixels
jump to
short.
that breakpoint. and on that display that you linked to, it's the exact right size that it would jump to that breakpoint.
God.
So a sick part of me is really tempted to buy one just to have it around to try out and see.
I mean,
the thing that scared me is like in the description, it's like you must accept that there will be like 4 to 5 dead pixels like out of the box. Like this is like our quality standards.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
I don't like that, but
no.
I don't know. I do need.
But I don't think I don't think I would. I mean, I have 3 XDR displays because I bought them years ago. Today, with the other options that are out there, I think I'd have a hard time rationalizing spending $6,000 on one because I'm not doing movie grade editing. Where I don't use HDR on any of them.
I just want more
right? Like
fucking space. That's
I
all
just want more
wanted.
space.
And
I
I
want
want
more
everything to be
space and I want
crisp.
crisp fonts, right?
Yeah,
I
that's
want
it.
I want my programming to look amazing. Well, and everything
Yeah.
else. I want the web to look amazing. And 6K just looks amazing. I think 5K is pretty good, but 6K, that's really where for me, the magic happens.
Yeah.
So that's why I have the XDR, because it was just the only 6K game in town for the longest time. And now there's going to be, I think, 3 alternatives. I think also LG is coming
it's
with a new
crazy
one
how
that looks
long
very
it's
promising.
taken for there to be
Yes.
alternatives. Because
But
when did
that's
the
also
XDR come out? Like 2019 or something?
It's been a while. It's been a while. I've had mine for a long time, which is also what's great about monitors when they have a longer shelf life than computers do.
Yeah.
Right? Like you can keep a monitor for 6 years and it's still great. Although
Well,
I think one of the reasons I had trouble getting on here, I think maybe I fried my USB dock or whatever that's on the back of the monitor. I could get my microphone to get power off it. So maybe this will be the thing that makes me get rid of the XDR, is because I killed the USB dock on the back of it.
Okay, 2 really quick things. One, what operating system do you guys deploy to at 37 Signals?
We deploy on Ubuntu. And
Okay.
that's because it's not a rolling distribution. We can lock that down and say, we're using Bionic, we're using this version of it, it has these packages, it's repeatable. I would not use Arch as a deployment platform for anything where you have to depend on the package interactions, which I'd say you should care about in most systems. So I think it's a developer tool first. I'm experimenting with some other things and using Arch on some home lab stuff, but for our production run at 37 Signals, it's still Ubuntu.
Yeah, I ask because I think there's like an argument to be made for like, I know like you guys are trying to get everyone to sort of move to Arch at 37 for doing development. And there's a strong argument for like, okay, well, if we're deploying to this operating system, we should be developing on it. Like, we're going to find things.
We are. This is
it's
the
close.
thing
It's
you'll
close
find.
enough.
It's Linux.
Yeah.
It's Linux. So versus the difference between being on the Mac and then deploying to Ubuntu is like vastly greater than being on
literally
Arch.
100% of all Mac developers have faced that like problem with like the case insensitive file system versus like the case sensitive file system on Linux when you deploy something and it just doesn't fucking work.
Right. You don't have that. It's Linux. I mean, that's also the magic. This is also why for some time I was like, do you know what, distro hopping is a little dumb, because the magic of Linux is like 92% just the kernel. Incredible civilization scale accomplishment to have those 40 million lines of code not just exist, but being actively maintained and updated. So that's incredible. And then you got all these other packages where most of them are the same, and it's all running on Linux. It's not that different.
Does basically everything that runs on Ubuntu run on Arch? Like, or are they literally having to compile like, is it a separate Chrome binary for Arch than it is for Ubuntu?
It's distributed through a different package manager, but it's the same. It's the same underlying stuff. Everything works in the same way in that regard. So that's why all of it is way closer. Like, we're talking about the last micron of differences compared to like GASM as you have with whether you're on Windows or on the Mac. That's quite different. And the Mac is closer, obviously. Windows is sort of getting there with WSL. If you don't use WSL, it's like complete different continent. Like PowerShell, Windows straight. I always have this morbid fascination of like, who the fuck would run open source software like Ruby like that? I mean, it's cool. It's cool that someone would do it, because holy shit, you are in for a ride. Like, that is a million times harder to do than getting something up and running on Linux.
A lot of people's pain tolerance is just like extremely high, detrimentally.
I like
high,
it. I think we're actually too weak. It's funny you mentioned that, because I've been struggling with how much pain to keep in the installation process for Omachi. Because right now, it is a bit of pain, right? And I always feel like it's a vetting process. If you can't take even connecting to Wi-Fi through a TUI, maybe this is not for you. Maybe you should just go back to the Mac thing and let Apple and Cupertino do everything for you, right? Which, by the way, no judgment, sort of. But do that. I want to make sure that we still keep some of it in here, because, again, it is Linux. So there's been calls like, hey, can you put a GUI on top of how you set up your monitors? And I'm like, no. We're doing config files. You go into your config file, you change the things you want, then you save that file, and that now is a portable preference you can take with you. I always did, like, the Mac has these preferences. It's under library support whatever. It's just it's not not the easiest thing to move those things
No,
around.
those are the
They're
things
not
that you're
meant
sort of scared to touch really on
right.
macOS
They're
too.
not meant for
Yeah,
users to manipulate
yeah,
directly, right? That's for the system to do. On Linux, you're meant to tinker with your configs, and I
right.
don't want you to be afraid of the text editor.
Hmm. Very last thing, okay, and I think this is the right place to end it on. What are still like your huge biggest pet peeves about like the system that you're running right now?
Let's see. I mean, I really want to get this ISO done, partly because I want more people to feel like it's something they can try, but also just for me. Again, I use a lot of computers. I really like computers. I love playing with new computers. I want I want unwrapping to Omachi up and running 5 minutes. That's it.
Hmm.
That's my internal target. Like I had the 15 to get fully productive at 37, but just setting the system up should be 5 minutes. I really want to get to that. So that requires building the ISO and getting that set up. Um, the pet peeve is the same thing actually as everyone says. Like I'd like more efficient laptops. I'd like AMD to have as efficient wattage draws as the M chip system. We can get longer battery life. I think all of it is just around the corner to get there. When I get 6 hours of mixed juice out of my Framework 13, that's enough. But would I like more? Yeah, of course I'd like more. Like there's no at this point sort of structural reason for why the Mac needs to be that efficient.
Sure.
What I realized, and I mean, I'm a huge fan of those M chips. I think one of the best
Yeah.
things Apple's done, introducing those M chips, has really changed the game for
That
Mac
was probably
hardware.
like the most groundbreaking, innovative thing they've done in like the last 10 years, I think. Like,
Yes, yes. Certainly think that matters for most people. And a big part of it is actually battery, because on performance, AMD has caught up. So you compare, for example, the Framework 13 laptop punches about the same as an M3 Pro, I think. So like we're trading like 1 year back and forth here in terms of performance. And if you look at the Framework desktop, that's like M4 Max levels of just raw CPU performance. You start throwing any workloads that involve Docker after it, and you might be twice as fast as you are on a Mac because Docker runs natively on Linux. So the chips are getting really good, but we should not settle for really good. We should settle for like as good as or better, which, by the way, was the reality in the Mac world for literally almost the entire time I've used the Mac. The Mac was always behind on hardware. And the reason we were okay with that was because we really love the software. We really like Mac OS, right? I mean, I'd say there's some Macs I remember very fondly, like the prior to 2011, I think they used to have 1.5 millimeters of keyboard travel, which is, by the way, exactly what the Framework 13 has now. Some of the Framework magic is simply just taking the best ideas out of Apple's own catalog and bringing them back. Like modern MacBook keyboards are things you can, of course, use to type with. Once you've used 1.5 millimeters of travel again, you just go like, how do people freaking live like this? Like I still have a MacBook and occasionally pull it out for some testing, and I go like, Jesus, I don't want to type on this. So there's some stuff to catch up on. There's a bunch of stuff to celebrate. I think Omachi still has, I mean, we're 2 months into it. We're 2 months into building a new system from scratch, and I started with a room full of Lego blocks. Like, it's going to be unbelievably much better in another 2 months, in another 6 months, in another year. And I'm really excited for that, and I can't wait to just map out the rest of the terrain and then go like, okay, I'm done. I do want to get to that. Like, I don't want to be just like, oh, for the next 10 years, what I'm going to do is Rice Linux. No. I'm going to sprint until I'm done, and then I'm just going to freaking use it. It's funny because do you know how long I used TextMate? Like
20 years or something?
Years.
Yeah.
19 years. Like I found a text editor I really, really, really liked. I helped sort of steer Alan on the development on it back in 2005. And I was like, I don't need anything else. I don't care. Get your VS Code and your inline AI completion out of my face. I just want a great text editor. So I do these things where I just go all in with 400 miles an hour, and then I reach a point where it's great. And then I just go like, great, now I just use this.
Cool, man. Well, I'm excited to play with it some more and give it like an honest try for some real stuff, which I haven't yet. It has been hard to let go of like my comfort zone when it comes to getting real work done.
Yes.
but I do think I need to do it, especially because right now, like my job is recording videos, and that's where I kind of feel like, okay, I don't want to fuck with any of that stuff right now. But
So this is just keep the Mac around. That's I mean, that was my little safety blanket. I was like, I'm not going to give the Mac away. I'm going to keep it all there. If I really need it, I can go back to it. And then you go through 3 days of withdrawal where like all your memory or your muscle memory needs a little rewiring and all your expectations need to be reset. Then you go like 1 week that's like, you're still whining. And then on week 2, you go like, holy shit, this is actually better. Yeah. I bet you that's what's going to happen.
Cool, man. Well, thank you for jumping on and doing this with me. Just spur of the moment. This has been super fun. Hopefully people get excited about giving it a shot because like, yeah, I'll say I was surprised how delightful it felt to play with, like when I booted it up. I didn't know what to expect really. And it really does feel like a polished, very fast, especially. I think like, again, it's like a perceived performance thing more so than like a real performance thing. It just feels like I can get to everything that I want to do like instantly. Like it doesn't feel like there's any fucking around, you know, it's just one keyboard shortcut away to anything I need to do ever. And there's just something, there's something that makes you feel like physically like connected to the computer, like you're controlling it with your mind in like a different way, you know, it's very cool.
Do you know what it is? It's the difference between playing Fortnite at 20 FPS and 120. That's what the difference is. You can enjoy yourself. You can play Fortnite at 20 FPS. Like if you tried 120, it's very hard to go back to 20, right? Mm-hmm. Lots of people played shooters at 30 FPS. Let's call it 30, not 20. 30 FPS, right? That was the norm for a lot of video games for a long time.
Cool, man.
All right.
I'll let you go.
My battery's
Thanks
done.
again. All right. Perfect timing.
I didn't plug in my Sony. So literally it's out of battery.
Amazing timing. All right. Awesome, we'll leave that in. Okay.
All right. Excellent.
See you later.
Later, man.